There we are. Just drop in suddenly. Here we are.
No, it's like our music needs to fade us in.
I know. It just unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But yeah, agreed.
Well, good morning and welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anybody who manages projects for a living in any way, shape, or form. If you've been on a project, program, product group, or operations manager, or a lot of other things that may have manager after the title, maybe you've owned your own business, you wear all the hats, this weekly series is definitely for you. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I explore project management topics from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. Because it's so much more fun to talk about the failures than it is about the successes. That's what we remember anyway, the trauma. In each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about the common pitfalls, sharing personal stories and experiences. We have many, and we'll explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
So this time in this episode, I thought we'd do something a little bit different. And maybe we just have a casual conversation for like 30 minutes, talk about whatever we want to, bring up some general project management stuff, and just see where it goes.
Wait, what?
I'm just kidding, of course. So this is actually a lesson on our topic today.
And scene. Thank you. Thank you.
So our topic today is ignoring the process, the cruciality of process adherence, and how process adherence results in consistency and more successful project outcomes.
I have learned so much already, Sharon, from that object lesson. So thank you.
So all joking aside, this is like an incredibly important topic that many PMs and managers across the board deal with and struggle with on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's the urge to go rogue and do it your own way because, my way is the best way. And that can cause a lot of organizational headaches. But it should be a good conversation. So with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode and share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we may have missed. And I'll share in the banners throughout our X profiles and different places where you can provide feedback and see past episodes.
Okay, let's get started with some definitions.
Yeah. So process adherence. And this is one of those things too, where I personally, like I different times in my career, I also struggled with it because sometimes it's really easy to take the shortcuts to go and, or this is even a more common scenario is an executive comes and says, hey, look, we don't need to go through with the formal documentation of this thing. This should be very quick. Should just take a couple days to go and do it, find this engineer resource to go and build this thing. That it never works out that way, ever.
I'm going to go with rarely.
Yeah, rarely. But it's about adhering to the process. It's about having established workflows, methodologies, framework, procedures in your approach to project management. And it is something which, again, I've learned that battle. I've learned that lesson from having those battles around then the inevitable scope creep that comes with that quick, easy project. And while you and I, we talk about this all the time, it's not about bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, but it's about having proper framework, guardrails in place so things are properly documented, that the right questions are asked so that you can mitigate any risks, any problems, any issues with the project, having answered those. It's okay to say, hey, NA, it's not applicable. We can move faster, but we've asked the question and we have it documented.
Yeah. The biggest thing to risk, I think, is not knowing what's going to happen and not being able to control what's going to happen. And so I guess I look at it this way. And as a Six Sigma black belt, this is like drilled into our heads too. The more you can manage, the lower the risk gets. So a lot of process adherence is the idea of defining what the process is and following it limits your overall level of risk, because at a bare minimum, you know what's going to happen and you can set expectations for at least that part of it. So then if things go sideways, things happen that you're not expecting, at least there is a level of something that you can manage to, as opposed to just kind of being a free-for-all and not having anything that you manage.
But another part of this too, if you've never worked on a project to take a to get some kind of certification, some standards body, or to take a product public and go through some of the legal steps versus an internal IT, we're just going to use this as a project for our own usage. There are additional questions and steps. So having established process, it means that, hey, we have a consistent approach. We can see if we are more or less efficient in this activity, which efficiency comes down to, and quality is around how are we measuring these activities. If you are not at least attempting to be consistent in your approach to projects, how are you ever going to know that you need to improve in different areas? If everything is a one-off, then how do you improve things in general? What is improvement? How are you defining improvement? What are the metrics around that? Because the metrics will change every time if you're changing the process every time.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And how do you manage expectations? I mean, at the end of the day, if you do exactly the same thing as much as possible and you understand what's going to happen, expectations, communications, collaboration, all of that gets a little bit easier too, because everybody knows what to expect and when. And so, those things get easier as well.
And then if you are on a more complex project, if you've ever worked on a multi-department or multi-company project, the scope of which spans years. If you're not following a methodology, it's near impossible to try and keep that organized and moving forward and be able to show the progress against that. So it's critical that you have clearly defined processes, guardrails in place for that. And again, especially if you're a public entity, if you are dealing with international standards or different industry standards, how are you going to document that? How are you going to be able to show that, hey, we're doing all the right steps in the right way to get by these standards?
Audit.
Yeah. Audit. Yes. Sharon, have you done many projects where you've been brought in to audit not just the project with the output, but look at the process itself of that team?
Yeah, in fact, I've done everything from assessment audits all the way to actually supporting internal audits of different organizations that have come in. I've worked with consulting companies doing very large government contracts where at the end of the project or a certain part during the project, they would have an audit team come in, and not only did they audit the project, but often they would say, okay, we need to see think about SOX compliance. We need to see the documented processes. We need to understand how you're following them. We need to see how can you prove that not only are they documented and you're following them, but you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I think, the more that you identify it, document, and follow it, when it comes time to audit, it's very, very easy because you can just be like, let me show you, our documentation. Let me show you recordings of our meetings. Let me show you our agendas. Let me show you our meeting notes where we have followed the thing that we said we're following. Audit gets a lot easier when you do those things.
Yeah, I'd say that my time working for the phone company, so back when it was Pacific Bell, before the first acquisition, when SBC bought us, and then we bought AT&T. So before all of that, and it's still out there as AT&T. But the working for Pacific Bell, my second job was essentially to go in and look at the operations and to kind of rebuild this as part of my job, rebuild the organization. And that was kind of my path to getting into the business of building PMOs, project management organizations for companies. And so it's basically doing that every time going in. It's a little bit different. So sometimes they're strong in one area of the actual project management activities or the BA and PM roles, those functions, but the handoffs with engineering and operations and QA if there's there, support teams, kind of all the other different teams. A big part of that is making sure that, because you could be perfect in your system, but if you have poor communication and input and output from those relationships, communications with those various teams, doesn't matter how good you are over in your walled garden.
Yeah, I'm sitting here laughing, I'm thinking, so from the failure side, I'm thinking about so many different places. And I know there was one
so many failures, Sharon. Just pick one of your best failures.
So many failures. I was actually thinking about one where we had a whole bunch of different contractors, and we get this really large project. And one of my jobs was to review the contract and identify all the different roles. And then I assisted with creating an onboarding procedure to bring in. We had to hire, I want to say we hired it was 15 or 20 contractors in the course of 2 months. And they all had to be, of course, up onboarded and ready to go within, weeks of being hired. And I'm like, okay. But it was really funny because, I had another group that kind of was in the same boat, and they brought a bunch of people on at once, and all of them just had no idea what to do. None. They were struggling, I would walk by and they were just sitting in their cubes staring at the wall. I walked by one cube and a guy was sleeping because they had no idea what to do. They didn't know what their jobs were. They didn't know what the project was. They didn't know the people that were working on. All they knew is they were given a laptop and they were told to make something, and they were given the place to put their deliverable, but that was it. And so, by going through and working with each of these people and onboarding them and catching them up to the project and bringing everybody kind of into the same place, doing the same thing, we obviously drastically improved that project. But I just remember walking by the individual contributors as we were getting ready for that, and they were just like, I don't know what to do right now. And I'm thinking in my mind, how much money are we losing right now with everybody that's sitting here having no idea what to do?
I did it again, Sharon, too. I had the wrong banners up here.
No,
there we go.
it's okay.
It's just, I know.
They'll find us.
Here. So trying to, hey, it's again, pointing back to multitasking. Don't do it, people. So there we go. There's the actual information. So I was clicking on things without looking at it on the right side. There's all the rest of it. You find the back episodes there. But I think of the importance of following the process. It really down to kind of 3 core things. One, that consistency, the predictability of that. So it's the same. We're attempting to do it the same way. If we find out that, hey, there's that should allow you to adapt and change based on the type of the project, but it's still, there's a consistent approach to that. Like the structure of projects, we always have our kickoff, we have our communication plan, we have our cadence of meetings, of reporting, of all those different things. We have the way that we provide the status, that we track the overall timeline, that we look at the portfolio view of all the various projects up to our management team, tracking of the budget, of our resource utilization. At the end of the project, once it's delivered, we of course there's a lot of stuff in between that, obviously, but then we have that post-mortem where we learn from the process and change the process. So you're constantly in there refining the process itself, the model, but it's done. There's that change process is part of the process. So again, it's consistent and predictable. The second piece is that you have an overall approach to risk management. So it's all about identifying risks as early as possible and having a process for discussing them in that weekly cadence or twice a month, whatever the cadence is. But it's a documented, defined process for handling those. And then you have once milestones have been reached, you have that QA, the quality assurance part of that, where you're checking, you're verifying, you're validating. Are these meeting not just the technical requirements, but are what we've deployed, we've proven against the technical requirements? Are they truly meeting the business requirements, what was asked for? But that's it. Consistency, the risk management, and the quality assurance are like the 3 primary motives behind that process adherence.
And that's why we do the project failure files at the same time, same day, every week to build that consistency. Everyone knows when to expect us. They're not going to have to be like, what day was that again? They know exactly when to find us. It's all about consistency.
They're still going to say that, Sharon, to remind people like, oh yeah, no, it's the same time every week. It is. It truly is. 9 a.m. Pacific every week.
Yep.
So what happens, Sharon, when people circumvent the process? What has been your experience?
Oh, geez. Circumventing the process is when people go around governance. It's when they take shortcuts. It's when they skip steps in the process. And I would say most of the time, it's a very, very, very small sliver where nothing goes wrong. Most of the time, it comes back to bite you in the, you know what, down the road in some way, shape, or form, or it just falls apart and you have issues. It's always going to create some sort of problem, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah. You know, I had a great manager. I've had some really good managers that understood, project management and process and were consistent about it. But one who taught some important lessons is just said one time where I was really beating myself up about something slipped. I mean, I don't even remember what it was. If it was a timeline slip because I just had too much on my plate. I mean, that issue arose a few times where I just took too much and there weren't enough hours in the day type things. I know it doesn't ever happen these days.
So
Sharon,
surprising. I would never do that.
Yeah. No, but so I lost control of that, but I was accountable to that. It was like, hey, this is what happened, what I did. But here I was beating myself up, and he's like, Christian, like, that's like, we recognize it's good. If you had not recognized that this happened because like you did not reach out earlier for help. Like I wasn't providing timely, comments, feedback on this is going on. I'm getting swamped. I've got these other requests. This is taking longer, whatever that was. He's like, just if you would have said something, somebody else could have stepped in, taken some off your plate to go and focus on that. We would have been able to hit the timeline. He's like, don't dwell on this. Like, okay, lesson learned. Like, I know you're not going to do that again, or at least get better at not doing that, which is the reality. We're all going to slip up again in some areas. But being accountable is great, but not dwelling on it. Allow people to learn from their mistakes is an important part of a healthy collaborative organization. But yeah, so losing control, especially if you're not accountable like that, that's a bad combo.
No, I want to reiterate that.
Risk of failure. Yeah.
I want to reiterate that. I want louder for the people in the back, because here's the thing. I think oftentimes we do try to shortcut things and we say, no, I've got it. It's okay. And you can see that stuff stacking up. You can see, well, there's so many parts and pieces and things I have to do to stay on the rails and do it the right way. And it's so easy to say, no, it's not a big deal. I'll just grab it, instead of simply saying, hey, I'm not going to get to that in time. Can you grab it? And then you know what you end up with? You end up with that little bit off of I Love Lucy where she's stuffing chocolates in her face and in everything else and they're dropping on the floor. Because instead of just saying the belt is going too fast, I can't keep up, she shortcutted the process. And
yeah, you know what I'm so envious of, Sharon? Just having dropped my car off at the mechanic for just a routine service, but is the fact that they have the ability to go in and look at, okay, this is once they determine what the issue is, that they can say, look, with these parts, and this is what it takes. They have it so broken down into their, the standard rates of it. They know fairly close, like it takes 2 hours to do this activity on your car. We've determined, yes, that's what that is. It's 2 hours. So and with my mechanic, and when I always say with a good mechanic, we'll say, it's like, look, I give you the estimate of 2 hours. They will charge me less if they do it quicker, but not charge me more if they go slightly over that time. If it's something else and they find something else, obviously that can be more, but they're my mechanic's really good at that. But anyway, the idea of being able to have that structure, these repeated process to be able to do that. Now, when we work on scope of work, so we worked on a few together, it's so much more difficult to do that. There's some activities we know. If you come to us and say, hey, look, we need help with a SharePoint migration from 2016 to SharePoint Online. We have, one tenant. We have about 150 sites with the X amount of data around that, this number of workflows, whatever that is. We have a pretty good idea because we've been through that enough times to give an estimate that's going to be fairly close, still with some wiggle room around the complexity things like moving workflows or InfoPath forms or whatever those other things are. But so much else, it's so difficult to do that. But what you can have is like when you're not accurate in estimating the exact time it'll take to do that activity, the framework, having the process in place allows you to communicate better on the changes of the dynamic portions of the project.
Well, yeah. And I even think like the way that we project manage every project is almost identical. And we do that on purpose. We try really hard to work with our clients on their methodologies and their styles, but we always take into account the fact that we are going to do a project status report. We are going to meet with them on a regular basis. We are, there are certain things that we have in the architecture behind the scenes around how we do a project that gives us that ability to kind of have a good starting point and to understand what we're going to do, what the estimates are going to do. And to the conversation about this, what our level of risk is and what our level of success rates are. And, we already have a good idea of a lot of that. And the more that we adhere to that process consistently and diligently, overall, the more we know that our estimates are well put together and our risk is low.
Well, one other thing too, that from looking at the cultural aspect, is we always love talking about the cultural aspect of it, is that when you have that process adherence, it also has a direct impact on team morale and trust of the process. And this was something, and I've had this several times throughout my career, and I've shared a version of this. I've talked about these a couple times where I've gone in and done like the the morning stand-up meetings, which we've talked about many times. Done that at several clients and roles that I've had. But when you have direct reports, in fact, project managers that were really frustrated by they're being pulled in different directions by different internal customers that all have different priorities, that are all demanding their attention right now. And me pushing out to them saying, this is the process, and your pushback to them is the process. And don't beat yourself up about it. In fact, you can use me as the bad guy to say your new request needs to go through the front door process. And you need to, if you want to expedite that, go talk to Christian about that. And then of course, if that person came over to me and said, hey, I've got this project, it's urgent, what can you do? I said, all right, let me grab the PM, any other key people on my team that would work on this project. Now let's go look at the process and our projects. This is what we have in the queue. And you tell me whether you feel that this is a higher or lower priority than what we have in that. And so, and that helps explain to them the process. We're pointing back to the process. It doesn't mean if they came and they said, look, and like my VP said, hey, this is the highest of priorities, we would turn things around immediately and put people on that and pause everything else. But the process says we're not just going to go and make rash decisions without considering the downstream effects of this change. Here's the process. Go through this. Let's ask these questions. Let's, triage this new request, and then we'll make adjustments where necessary overall. And because people have increasingly trust in that process, They know when they have a new request, they're more likely to come and, not ask if they know it's a lower priority, or come and ask where it fits and get into the queue so it's next in line. But they'll trust that process, that they see it in action.
Yeah. And so also, the more that you adhere to a process like that, a couple of really beautiful things happen. People trust in the process, which means they don't take it personally, which means they also don't react as personally, because they're just like, okay, they kind of learn how to take their turn and stand in line to some degree. But also, it opens you up for things like automation. It opens you up for things like self-service. So for example, if I'm able to have a process defined, even for what you just brought up, maybe project requests, instead of somebody having to talk to them and answer questions and email back and forth, they can fill out a form. That form can go through a process. Maybe they want to know what their status is. They can log in. They can see what their status is. It creates this beautiful environment for everybody to be part of the process instead of keeping it at a personal level. And I think for your culture conversation, a lot of the reason that it impacts culturally team morale and trust is because when you're dealing with individuals have their own priorities. They have their own things that are going on. And oftentimes they might look at one thing differently than another thing. And maybe they're out, on vacation, and a different person steps in and doesn't understand how that person normally does it. But when you follow a true process where everything is kind of treated the same and everything gets, acts the same way in that process, every task is dealt with the same way. It doesn't really matter. It no longer is it, well, so-and-so does it this way and so-and-so does it that way. It's just, no, you turn in the request, it goes to this place, the status gets updated. I know that I don't have to wait on a certain person to know how to do something because it's going to follow something that has already been identified.
But that is, you're talking about, and we kind of covered this when we were talking about, transparency of this entire, of the process. If you have that transparency, but if you have standards in the way that you're communicating and reporting of those things, tracking these things, and your, the three key things, your timeline, your budget, and your resource management. If you have a consistent way of doing those things, you're not saying how that project needs to be executed. You can have very different projects. You can have some that are internal, some that are customer facing, some that are, massive and have direct business impact or to the bottom line of the company that drive revenue, and others that are internal efficiency measures. The things that, again, it's not making judgment call around that. What it's saying is, here's the people we have, here's the budget we have, here's the time that we have. You're asking for these things. Here's the priority. Here's where we are, and be able to manage to those things. And then when somebody comes in and says, following that structure, we have a standard way that we can reply and say, look, we saw these risks. This is how we handle this. If the risk becomes a reality, then was already our plan that we agreed that if this happens, this is what we do around this. We're now mitigating this. We're already thinking about the next level of risk if we've not already done that. So it provides, context to I always refer to it as the portfolio view versus the individual project view. So a project that lives inside of all of the various projects that we have, but allows you to really see the consequences of change, of the decisions or the lack of following the process, such as budget overruns, extended timelines, or failure to meet, objectives of individual projects. All are realities when you subvert the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it's so funny to me because I get called in constantly to solve problems. And I think as a consulting firm, a lot of times we get the calls when somebody's hair is on fire and they're like, okay. I admit it. I need help. I've got a fire back here. Can you help me get it under control? And I think the thing is, it's not just about helping them put out the fire, but it's helping them set things up for future so that we don't get back in that same issue again. And I think that's exactly what you're saying is this isn't just about, well, we skipped a piece in the process, or we did it a different way because we've kind of learned, that there's some good stuff in here. What we're saying is, you need to have a plan and you need to follow the plan so that everybody is kind of on the same page. We see it the same way, we experience it the same way. And it just makes everything a lot easier to manage that way.
It's the whole teach a man to fish, feed him, or if you give a man a fish, feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, feed him for life. And it's
Yes.
I've got a client right now where I'm very much most of what I'm doing. Well, I would say most of a big portion of what I am doing is providing repeatable templates, sharing the structure, teaching them how to go and do a large portion of what I'm doing for them to be able to do that on their own in an orderly way. Now, do I hope that they extend and do other projects at the end of this? Of course, but I want them to build on that baseline and be able to then take that on, and then I can go and do other activities, which I personally are more fulfilling or more exciting projects anyway than the baseline activities. But that's a core part of it. Even for me to go and execute, even if I was doing it all for them, I would still need to go put this structure in place just so that I can show with them, illustrate, like, here's what I'm doing. Here's the transparency into what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, and then be able to report back on that over the months.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was just going to say, as a consultant, I'm not going to lie. Like, we're supposed to be showing people how to follow the process. But as the consultant on the other side, it's really funny to me when I work with clients and they're like, I give them an original estimate and they're like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Wouldn't it be cool if we could do that? I'm like, yes, it would. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you need to manage your scope a little bit better. But so a lot of times what I will do is I try to be good. And I say, you know what, that is a great idea. Let's put this over here in a backlog so that we can work towards it and help them to maintain their scope, even though technically I could become a budget overrun real fast.
Yeah. Well, and thinking too of strategies for reinforcing process adherence. I mean, the first thing I would always start with, and it's where I started when I was my first client as building out a project management organization for a client, was I had a 3-ring binder of templates. So it was being able to share with them examples and recreate for them the process documentation. Like, here's the methodology, here's the approach. Not everything will apply, but let's start documenting the process as you're doing it today, what we know we need to change, and what's new there. And then let's slowly incorporate that into, but every net new project follows this structure to the T. And so getting them to do that changeover, it takes some time. It's a big training change depending on how enthusiastic every team member is. And then depending what tools that they have as well. So if it's a very manual process, I always like to say, as far as tools, and that was a big part of what I did, was I focused on the tooling, and I had some favorite tools. But what is still the number one project management piece of software that's out there? Still the number one solution for project management: Excel. Yeah.
Definitely
and so
Excel.
Very basic. That
it's an investment, right?
Yeah.
Just deciding that you're going to define what your processes are. And I participate in the maturity model for Microsoft 365 group. And, one of the big things that we talk about is that investment of time, energy, and resources just to get to the point where you're defining those processes is such a huge, huge step to get you to maturity, that first step is so critically important to not just say we have a process, not just understand you have a process, but write it
Here's what it
down.
Is. It's documented, right? Here it is where everybody can find it. Don't hide that. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, then this is it's probably the step one, the true step one, but at least step two, worst case, which is making sure you have leadership buy-in on that. You have that executive sponsorship. I can't tell you how many projects where, like I had one where the leader left, took another role internally, but moved away. And so then there was no sponsorship for my entire team. And that was a horrible experience, not having that voice, that advocate in with the leadership team, with their peers. So having that leadership that strong leader that reinforces the importance of the process. And it could be that they're just saying, hey, listen to Christian on this thing. Like, he's brought in specifically to do this. We will do this thing.
They need to model that behavior. I think back to, do you remember when my sites were brand new and everybody was excited? Well, okay, Microsoft was excited about it. I don't know that anybody else was really super excited about it.
The idea of it, yes.
But we were trying to get my site adoption up, and we found that a lot of people are doing it, but their leadership was not doing it. And I think they were looking at that and they were like, well, I don't have to do it because they don't have to do it. So we actually made an effort to go out to the senior managers and show them it and say, we really want, not just we want to train you on this, but we really want to get your support by you doing this and updating this and posting to it on a regular basis, so that the people who work in your organizations will see not only are you supporting it, but you're doing it. Because I think it's really important for leadership to not only say that they're supporting it, but to do it and to model the behavior. And it's that whole idea of, if you do stand-ups, whoever is the leadership in that should be on those stand-ups as often as possible. If you're doing meetings, leadership should be there. If you're, requiring your team to follow a certain process or do a certain thing or have a certain deliverable, as much as possible as it lines up with a leadership's, ability to do it, have them participate in that, because just simply modeling that behavior, I think, makes a huge difference in process being successful.
Yep. No, I was just thinking too of the one client.
You're looking at my sites.
Basically I was doing a project. It was for the first project. I worked with them for over a year, did some other projects for them. And a lot of it was like operations, just cleanup of the organization, but started by reporting directly to the CFO. So a lot of the process change, like, had the leadership team sign off on all of that. And I felt like kind of like the narc. I was the outside consultant brought in. In fact, they referred to me, they called me Bob from the movie Office Space, the two Bobs, the two outside consultants. It's like, you're just, I hope your firings go really well, Bob. Well, thanks. But that was kind of my job, was to audit. And so reported to the CFO, and he was fantastic about that. He's like, what do you need me to do? I'm like, I need you to go lay the law down with all of your direct reports. Like, they're not responding in a timely manner. I need them like this, like commitments. And he just laid down the law, and stuff got done. And it was, I know I've shared a little bit of this project, but it was actually where after we had delivered that, the audit and all the process changes and all those things, is I was moved on to another project, but I came back and did a surprise audit like 2-3 weeks later, and caught people that had gone immediately back to the old ways of doing things. And two people lost their jobs. Like, I felt bad, but like, come on, when you're talking about in the accounting department, like following the rigor of the process with the handling of customer credit card information and PII, right? It's huge. And besides the fact that the company was being fined daily, for violations before the cleanup. So it was a big deal.
Do that right.
But anyway, having that, which kind of leads to the next part of that. I mean, it's great having the executive sponsorship, but you then need to have that training, like from the beginning, part of the onboarding of new employees in. Clearly your project managers, your business analysts, anybody that's interacting directly with the PM function, but ongoing training of that. And then as part of that, your regular process reviews and updates. So you're from the communication, like your weekly status calls, to your reporting, to your post-mortem at the end of the project, but to make that part of your process where you're looking both at the results of the project as well as the process that you used to execute the project, that you also need to be reviewing on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just keeping people up to date. And this is why, you'll see so many places that, once a year you have to rewatch the videos, you have to do the quizzes, you have to answer the questions. And after like 5 years, you're like, I know what all the answers are. Guess what? You can be taught. And
Right.
but the whole idea is really to make sure that you understand what it is. You can answer the questions, you can do the things you're supposed to do. And I love places that really support that. And I've said for years and years and years, I would rather somebody that shows up every day and is very consistent over some rock star superhero performer who sets everything on fire and then, flies their
Figures
cape to
out.
pull it out.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's too. And I think you often bring this up, and it's all honest. It's something I constantly need to work on, but is then the positive reinforcement. So recognizing people that are, doing the right things and following that, but that is so critical so that people don't get burned out and they do feel like you're reinforcing the fact that people are following that structure. But it kind of goes back to all of this is that you can't improve upon the process until you're following the process. So the next step, when you do have the majority of your people that get it and they're using it, they're following that, they're providing feedback, and you're making the process more efficient, more effective going forward, they can then start looking at how can we do more, how can we take on more, how can we be faster, more accurate, kind of all those things. And that's a continuous process, continual process improvement, some would say. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's an entire, it's an entire way of living. But in Six Sigma, one of the things that we do whenever I do a Six Sigma test prep class is we build a paper airplane, which sounds very like little and not a big deal. And I teach them on the first couple of days how to create a paper airplane. And they're like, okay, Sharon, like I know how to make a paper airplane. But at the end of the class, we always have a competition to see who can get their airplane in the same place that they think it's going to land. And what I do is I throw them off towards the end of the class by giving them other things like paper clips and stickers and different weighted papers. Because at the end of the day, the understanding is if you know what you're doing and you stick to what you know and what you've been trained on, you have the lowest chance of risk and the highest chance of successful outcome. And so I always think to myself every time I talk to people about process adherence, it's what were you taught? It's practice makes permanent, right? Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So if you practice a bad thing, you're going to have a bad process. And if you practice a good thing, you're going to have a good process. Find the process that works, that you know, that you understand, and stick to it, and you have a higher chance of success.
If your process so you've got your framework for doing the projects, of course, but I think another thing as a secondary project or secondary process would be your change management process. So there's if you practice that activity as well, it's like doing fire drills. So when there's an actual emergency, an actual fire, you know how to act. And so that's what your change management process is too. And I know that we're kind of time here. A final thought. I just want to emphasize that, while it might be tempting to shortcut the process or in the idea that you're going to save time or effort around there, it's rarely the case that you save anything off that. It usually leads to negative consequences that far outweigh any perceived short-term gains. So that's why Sharon and I are emphasizing so strongly this idea of process adherence. That, I mean, really, we've talked about this in a couple other, weeks of episodes of the show, but it's something that we felt so strongly that we wanted to break it out in its own topic just to make that case, how important it is to adhere to the process. Once again, we don't care what your process is, what your methodology is, just have one and stick to it.
Yeah, in fact, there's an entire competency on the maturity model for Microsoft 365 that's around business process management. And I would highly recommend that you know where you're at in that maturity level and start to identify those things so that you know where you're managing your processes overall, and start work to going up that ladder and basically become more mature around it so that you can follow better processes.
Yep. Well said. Well, thank you everybody for watching this episode. And of course, please reach out, and this is the correct Twitter handles here. Reach out to Sharon and myself if you have any other questions or comments or feedback. You can find all of the past episodes out on YouTube under my profile named Buckley Planet. You can also find blog posts out on buckleyplanet.com. And if you do search over in the tag cloud on the right side for Project Failure Files, you'll find I write a short summary of every single episode, and then you can watch right from the blog post as well, any other important links there. And then we also have this Facebook community that's out there. And although we're going to be moving everything over to our other before the end of the year, probably. So yeah, we're planning to go live with a standalone community for that as well. But yeah, I think that's a wrap.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Next Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific, every Monday. We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.